Hey everyone, it's Cappy. Welcome to a special end-of-season series of Beyond the Plate, brought to you by our friends at PepsiCo Foods. Over the years, we've brought you memorable conversations and stories shaping today's food culture. This series is no different. We're joined by the members of PepsiCo Foods' first ever Culinary Advisory Board. From chefs and authors to food scientists and entrepreneurs, PepsiCo Foods has brought together 6 industry-leading culinarians, and I have the privilege of being one of them. Together, we serve as strategic advisors to help further the culinary journey at PepsiCo Foods, working to inspire new ways for people to experience PepsiCo's iconic food brands and bring more smiles to the table. In each episode of the series, we're going to uncover how this initiative can impact the food industry and how each advisor contributes their unique culinary expertise. Please enjoy this episode as we go beyond the plate with PepsiCo Foods U.S. Culinary Advisory Board member, Tyler Malek. Tyler, tell us something we don't know about you and your culinary career.
Oh, wow. So I went to culinary school for savory. We made ice cream once. And actually, even in that process, we were running Salt and Straw. I was in culinary school as we were running Salt and Straw as a food cart. So when we finally got to pastry, we finally got to make ice cream, and I was really excited. I was like, I know how to make ice cream. And so what I did is I had all these little tricks I was going to play with. I went out to the vending machine and I bought all of my ingredients from the vending machine and made ice cream. And it was actually the worst ice cream I've ever made by far. And I was so excited. I was like, this is going to be my moment to like show off. I'm like, I'm in savory, but like I know how to make ice cream so well. And I made this. I steeped some pretzels in the ice cream, and someone had a packet of chili flakes from Domino's in their like knife bag, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And I can't remember, it was a custard base, which in theory it still sounds so good, but I remember my pastry teacher just looking at me like, why did you do this to us? What were you thinking?
Everyone's like, yeah, good luck with that Salt and Straw thing you're working on.
It's not going to work out. But there was no rules at culinary school. I don't know, for everyone that's been to culinary school, the best part is like you can do whatever you want and you always go home with a little bit of food. And ultimately I dropped out because this Salt and Straw thing was going pretty well and I was running out of time in my life. But it was, to this day, that was probably the worst ice cream I've ever made.
Are you still in touch with anybody that was like in your culinary group or your chef instructors?
This was funny, actually. The head chef of the school, I remember having to sit down when I was dropping out, and I was like, I think I'm going to drop out of culinary school. And he's like, this is a bad idea. This is your career you're giving up on. And I'm like, no, this like ice cream thing, it's working out pretty well. I think I'm just going to stick with ice cream. And he's like, this is a horrible idea. And then I remember like a couple of years later, or a couple of years ago, so this was like 12 years later, I got an email from him and he's like, good job. You guys are doing great. I have this hot sauce company. Any chance we want to do a collab? And I was like, oh, full circle. So that was about it. Yeah.
Okay. So flash forward, when you first got the ask to be part of this inaugural culinary advisory board, what went through your head?
I was so nervous to be able to, just this opportunity to work with PepsiCo Foods it feels like the big leagues, right? I've even got a whole TEDx about my sense of imposter syndrome.
I was literally making a note to watch Tyler's TEDx.
I have to add, like, the TEDx talk was pre-COVID. It was in 2019. I probably looked so starry-eyed and so naive. I think it's so cool to be in this group with literally like some of the most famous chefs in the country, just dreaming up new ways to use some of these iconic foods that we grew up with. It seems unreal.
So interesting. You mentioned the imposter thing. I'm in the middle of a Smartless podcast episode with Alicia Keys, and she had her first record deal. She was like 15 or something, or wrote her first song when she was 11. And she talks about that a lot, even still to this day. She's like, I literally have conversations with myself about like, you are great and you can be great. She's like, I still have to have these discussions so I don't get in my head of what can go wrong when I go on stage type thing.
I got an award for Executive of the Year. And I was like, they said, I know it was, although I got the email and I was like, I'm not an executive. And then I was like, oh, wait, I am.
I love that. Okay. So what would you say you bring to the table, so to speak? Like, what can we expect from your involvement?
I think what's interesting is at Salt and Straw, we span the difference, like this really interesting world between like fine dining skills and techniques with really high volume food manufacturing. And so it's been so interesting to be able to work with the team at PepsiCo Foods to actually think about how do you take some of these core foods and actually like use them at scale in really, really unique ways. And so that's what's been so fascinating with me, like wrapping my head around like the nuts and bolts of like the storytelling from day one all the way to like how it's going to be perceived as at the customer level. It's my bread and butter. That's what we've been doing for 14 years with every single ice cream flavor we make. And it's kind of cool to start applying some of that skill set, that knowledge to a different world altogether.
So cool. And we had this media launch dinner in New York recently, and we all got to contribute.
It was so fun.
It was so fun. When I think of one of the dishes you did, I'm reminded of when I was at like a wedding and the appetizers are coming out slow, and I like plant myself near the door to the kitchen so I could like grab it right off the tray as soon as it came out. And I feel like that's what I did with your like sour cream semifredo dish. And then you had an incredible dessert too. So I would love for you to share with listeners those two dishes that you made.
I mean, first of all, we started with sour cream semifredo dipped on Ruffles with caviar on top, which is just this trifecta of flavor, texture, temperature. You're getting the cold, you're getting that kind of that intense crunch factor. It really is one of my favorites. This combination of using kind of this foundation, almost Ruffles as the foundation for flavors that are sweet, flavors that are like, add some brightness. We've been doing this at Salt and Straw for years. I mean, dipping Ruffles in chocolate, dipping Ruffles in caramel, like making cupcakes and drizzling caramel on with Ruffles on top. This was a no-brainer for me. And it was just really, really fun to use something that is a simple foundation that you can play with so easily. So
had you made that sour cream semifredo before?
Yeah, I mean, semifredo is one of my go-tos. We'll do a lot of kind of restaurant pop-ups. So doing kind of fine dining. We did a whole menu at Musket Room in New York City where we did every dish had an ice cream component. And semifredo is really, really great, especially for more of those savory elements because you don't need quite as much sugar. You can get a little bit more aeration and it holds together a little bit longer on kind of like warmer dishes. It keeps its form a little bit better. Sour cream just inherently is perfect in there. Obviously, sour cream, creme fraiche, like all of those are just, they add just that pop of acidity. It balances out the sugar that you need. It's just such a clean, simple combination.
Nice. And then tell us about that apple pie a la mode.
This was my favorite. And this is actually something we've been serving off and on at Salt and Straw for years. So it was kind of fun. The initial inspiration, we started with rice cakes, which is one of those foods that you never really think of as a topping element. I've always used it just as a base to spread peanut butter and Nutella or, tuna salad on top of. And ultimately, what's crazy is that as a pastry chef, we are constantly searching for new crunch factors. Like you think of like, oh my God, how much have I spent on puffed quinoa in the past years? And meanwhile, we've got this is the perfect kind of crunch that's already made for us and so easily available. And so breaking that up and actually like folding that rice cake into a crumble recipe with a little bit of spice, a little bit of sugar, it became the perfect crumble to put on top of an apple pie. So we made this apple pie. We made the crust with a few extra Quaker oats and which added a little bit of hardiness to it. The apples are really special. We actually don't bake the apples, which I know seems kind of like blasphemy, but we kind of age the apples in a acidic simple syrup. And so that acid kind of infuses, you get a little bit of osmosis. So it's more of a candying process on the apples than it is baking. And it leaves them just really, really bright. You still have all that kind of intense texture. And then vanilla ice cream a la mode is just all you need to finish it.
Yeah. That was so good. That's so interesting because I remember tasting the like diced up apples and I was like, wow, these have a beautiful like freshness and bite to them. It wasn't like a dark, rich, roasty flavor. It was like a crisp, tart. And I love, like, I'm a Granny Smith apple fan personally. Like, I love the tartness of it. It just reminded me of that in a way.
We were always playing with it because we always dreamed of like, can we get an apple pie flavor, but with more of like pickled apple technique? And in this case, letting it sit in that simple syrup is, I don't know, the pastry chef's version of pickling, I suppose. And so it really is, it's got all the brightness. It's got the juiciness of a fresh apple, but it's still got kind of that, just a little bit, the sweetness of a good, really good apple pie.
Amazing. A lot of our listeners at home have PepsiCo food brands in their pantry. Can you give us a tip or a unique way people may be able to incorporate them into their cooking at home?
100%. I mean, this goes all the way back to like when I was a kid, my family, in Montana, we grew up on salad. This is Midwest vibes, right? So we had so many salads, chocolate pretzel salad, frog eye salad, strawberry pretzel salad. There's so many different ways to kind of bring in those almost like casserole type dishes and add layers and layers of texture. And so that's where I love playing with how do you kind of layer in texture? And that's inherently what we're getting with especially a lot of the PepsiCo food brands is like these intense pops of flavor and texture that are just perfect. So you kind of almost see like the potato casserole with ruffles and baked on top, or even like kind of that classic Cool Whip cream cheese chocolate chip salad with pretzels on top, or pretzels kind of layered in between. There's so many. I just like am in love with the way that the textures of especially these like really crunchy, craveable, nostalgic brands bring to the table.
Even taking a step back to the crumble that you talked about, I think that's like a doable thing to do at home. Taking those Quaker lightly salted rice cakes, another thing pastry chefs love using a little bit of salt like in the sweet, and simple as making those into a crumble. I can imagine just like breaking those up a little bit and even adding some cinnamon, even like maple or something, I don't know, and using that as like a topping.
Yeah. That's my favorite recipe, actually. That's exactly it. Break them up, toss them in a little bit of maple, a little bit of extra granulated sugar, cinnamon, and then just bake them for like 5 to 10 minutes until that maple syrup dries back up, and it'll kind of soak in and dry out or re-dry the rice cakes. It's so perfect. You can munch on those. I could eat those all day, and they are the perfect topping for any dessert.
All right, one last question or two. If you could only eat one PepsiCo Foods brand for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It's a hard question. I gotta admit that we eat so many of the Simply Ruffles at home. It's one of my favorite like platforms for any food. So no matter what we've got in the fridge, it's like the perfect kind of foundation for hummus, for, a really good guacamole, for cheese. Like it's just like really is like my favorite.
We're big Simply Cheetos fans.
Yeah, I think if my family were answering right now, the Simply Cheetos Puffs would absolutely be the answer.
The white cheddar ones?
Yeah, that's what if my daughters were out answering this right now, that would be their answer, I'm sure.
What about if you could only use one in your cooking?
If we could only use one, I mean, this is like just foundationally, we use Quaker old-fashioned oats a lot in baking. This is one of our go-to in ice cream making and baking. For me, even at home, I've got an orchard, so we've got plums and apples and pears. And so I think you have no idea how many cobblers I make at home. That's like the best way to freeze fruits in mass, is to do a quick bake in the cobbler, and just taking those old-fashioned oats and just mixing them with a little bit of butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, and crumbling that on top of any fruit is probably the go-to trick all the time. And so I don't know if I could honestly live without those.
Find Tyler on Instagram at Tyler James Malek. Thank you for tuning in to this special series. To learn more about PepsiCo Foods, visit PepsiCo.com. Follow them on social media at PepsiCo. PepsiCo Foods, we thank you. This series was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joel Yetton, and Sean Petrosian. Find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media platforms at On Cappy's Plate, or go to BeyondThePlatePodcast.com. Our digital media producer is Sarah McClellan-Mead. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.